I keep getting pulled back in. Alright, let's go. It's been a whole freaking year since Spider-Man PS5 was released, and I'm left to wonder how much better the game would have been had it released now instead of then. Naturally, people are left in retrospect if the game was as good as remembered, or if it was overhyped or worth hating or loving. I don't really care about that right now, because throughout this game's lifespan, many different subjects were brought up on this product and were proven to be able to have discussion in its own merit with the gameplay, story, and its attachment to prior titles. One of the subjects of discourse was, well, if the game was woke or not, which I want to go over today in a more nuanced way. I notice whenever people talk about politics and gaming, a frustrating amount of people do so in efforts primarily to appeal to a spectrum that overly loves or hates it and attaches a lot of unnecessary emotional bias. I want to look at the prime points people use to point as their source of this game being woke and really look into the claims and find out, well, if it's true. So let's get started with
Exhibit A. You want to tell me what this is, Nessa?
this one's weird as hell because it goes all the way back to even the first game, and I guess even crosses over to other media for Spider-Man and directly applies to Miles. As you may know, Spider-Man 1 included a lot of missions where you as Spider-Man would work directly with law enforcement. Direct side characters in the field were a focal point, as well, with Yuri Watanabe and Jefferson Davis taking the spotlight of their own. Peter would work fairly closely with both these characters, and they'd provide a pillar to uphold Spider-Man's positive working relationship with the overall police force. I gotta say, it's nice to have Spider-Man adaptations where he's really cool with the cops and they don't actively hate him for annoying reasons. It also helps show his relationship with Yuri as well as the progress that's been made over his 8-year course career of being a superhero. The police being in-game was indeed toned down in Spider-Man 2. Jefferson Davis is dead, and Yuri Watanabe is no longer in law enforcement and is now a ruthless vigilante who leans into brutal methods of dealing with crime. There isn't nearly as much law enforcement inclusion within this game's side stories or events. However, when it comes down to the main two, we gotta keep in mind one was killed off to further motivate a character's arc going forward, and the other is undergoing her own character arc, splitting away from who she once was. I don't really see how Spider-Man 2's lack of inclusion of the police is really harmful. Yes, it's a bit odd for them to suddenly be a bit non-existent now, and one could argue that involving the police could open the door for potential missions, including them, I suppose. But this could apply to other aspects as well. Narratively, the biggest deal the police held were towards the DLC end of the first game, where the loss of sources, as well as the NYPD fighting a losing battle against Hammerhead's crew, was taking fold into effect. But even this was further fueling Yuri's motivation and character incentive. It's a double-edged sword there. It's weird, but at the same time very forgivable given that this doesn't hurt the overall narrative of the game. It's a bit odd, but that's really about it, and cops are still mentioned here and there, just not nearly as much. Also, apparently back in the first game and into the Spider-Verse, some people were apparently complaining that Miles' racial struggle should have been better showcased, and I guess they wanted him to get pulled over more even though his dad was a cop. What? Fun fact, everyone, gay people, lesbians, and the bisexuals do indeed exist, so bear in mind going forward. There has been LGBT representation within Insomniac Spider-Man since the first game, only getting less subtle as the games went on. Initially, you could only find some pride flags in areas around the city. Nothing too worthy of note here, but it was still neat and overall really harmless to include. There was also a woman you'd help as Spider-Man named Gloria in the introduction of the game. Spider-Man would direct her to a homeless shelter, and the same lady would reappear in the direct next game of Spider-Man Miles Morales. Gloria would introduce the player to her girlfriend, confirming that she was indeed a fellow female lover. Outside of that, there was nothing much in Miles' game specifically pertaining to LGBT besides that. It was overall nice to see Gloria as one of the many NPCs from the games that get their own little mini growth throughout the games. Now, Spider-Man 2 in fact has a little more LGBT representation. Not only are there more flags, but one of the main missions includes the not-so-anticipated return of Black Cat, who is now confirmed to have a girlfriend, confirming that she swings both ways on her whip attached to a pride flagpole. Now for context, if you know Spider-Man, you know there's only like one memorable adaptation where Spider-Man and Black Cat hook up. Peter and Felicia's relationship is a complex and toxic one, better suited for a mere trusting friendship rather than anything else. And this adaptation is no different, as this version of Black Cat directly betrays and manipulates Peter and indirectly helping her initiate a violent gang war, not really doing herself or her shippers with Peter any favors with these actions. Regardless, in her return she captures a magical scroll that allows her to travel wherever she pleases with enough concentration. Why does she have this? Well, she wants to be done with New York officially, as she discovers Craven's hunter group is, well, hunting her. Rather than criticizing the very selfish tendencies for Black Cat's character, people were more focused on the revelation that Black Cat now has a girlfriend for her waiting in Paris, insinuating that a lot has happened during the gap in between games, not just for the main cast. Black Cat was written to be into women just as she was into men. Sure, this would happen later on in decades of the character's existence, however, I don't think it's presented entirely out of her character. Obviously, the first and foremost love interest to Black Cat that we see was the unsuccessful, complex relationship with Peter Parker's Spider-Man. There was another hint that she carried a fellow interest in a woman named Tamara Blake, who was also the Iron Cat now. You should go check it out, it's pretty awesome. And the biggest note of all, her shared celebratory kiss that could possibly have led to even more action with Odessa Drake. Either way, fair to say she's into guys just as she's into girls. Bear in mind, especially in this adaptation, Spider-Man and Black Cat are effectively done being a thing. This was crystal clear as far back as the first game. Her moving on to be with someone else isn't really, bad or wrong. The real gripe is the fact that the closure feels a little off. Miles being the one to give Felicia the send-off and her last words with Peter being over the phone feels like such an unfulfilling moment and could have been handled a lot better. How about instead of this being a Miles mission, it's instead a Peter mission, and it's a lot longer than just the chase and team up. And instead there's a longer discussion throughout more than just one team up mission about how they've truly moved on from one another and no longer want hostility towards each other. Peter can suspect that Felicia is just fabricating her love story, and throughout their missions she can prove to him that she's really not trying to fake anything at all or pull a fast one. But Peter's just so sick of the charade until one final engagement with a boss or something that proves that he really can count on Felicia to not just do what's right, but that she's trying to change for less than selfish acts. Maybe give a mission or two where she's the one who gets to be playable. Insomniac, hire me, I can help you guys out. The issue here obviously isn't the newfound sexual orientation for Felicia, and if you think it is, you're just an asshole. The issue is the way they handled bringing back an established character who had some more ground to cover than what was handled. Especially for such a setup like this, Black Cat's not the only one to get this foreshadowing with a poor follow-up. It's not awful, but I don't think it's worthy of that much praise given that it's not as rewarding as it should be. The idea is not bad at all, it's the execution of said idea that's the problem. This is kind of the issue with the game overall, but subject for a different time. Oh yeah, and there's a side mission where you help out a gay college student offer his already established boyfriend to a date for the prom. This just feels unnecessarily elaborate, but whatever. No real harm here, as the mission is like 8 minutes and they don't do anything but hold hands. Oh, but Katana, kids are watching. Yeah, okay, so what? All they did was hold hands. Is Spider-Man just, now suddenly not allowed to tackle more mature topics? I understand that parents should be the ones to expose their kids to this subject, but even then, it's not like you can keep this kind of thing hidden from your kid forever. What, are you gonna get mad if you're with your kid in public and you see two dudes hold hands? Get real. Okay, this one's actually rough because I really need to talk about this character in the most fair and neutral, unbiased way possible, despite my feelings as how she could have been handled a lot better in more ways than one. Let's just be honest here, regardless of how you feel about the character, Insomniac's portrayal of Mary Jane is very controversial and divisive. She finds herself to be pretty unpleasant as a character in the first game. She recklessly jumps into danger despite being brutally unprepared at the cost of Peter's concern as well as the player's interest for playing. She also insists that she wants part of the action despite that being bad in multiple ways, not because she's a woman. And arguably worst of all, she reveals that she dumped Peter for looking after her. Granted, this is vague, but it insinuates that she was tired of being bossed around by Peter for her safety, and she felt hyper-constricted to his rulings despite being aware of everything going on. But there's a light at the end of this tunnel. Mary Jane's overall character arc requires the selfishness for the bridge of proper communication and understanding to be built between her and Peter. She confesses that she was truly tired of always being saved by Spider-Man and only ever wanted to repay that favor, and Peter himself was beginning to get more and more overwhelmed with trying to handle all the responsibility by himself, initially rejecting assistance from others. The two understanding each other better would grow as Mary Jane suggests working with Peter in more proper ways in later missions instead of going places without even telling him as she did earlier, blossoming a better working relationship. I understand some people found her unpleasant, but when we take all of this into account and really understand the arc, it's actually not horribly told. So what's that follow-up looking like? Well, in Spider-Man 2, Peter and Mary Jane are committed to one another in a relationship. The two are challenged as a couple with managing their personal lives as they attempt to build together while taking ownership of Aunt May's home. Peter's already gotten fired in record time and left unable to commit to finding another job to hold things together as his obligations as a hero get in his way once again. All while Mary Jane struggles as the essential breadwinner in the relationship as a journalist for Peter's biggest attractor. Ooh, talk about a struggle. Anywho, it's here as well as reuniting with Harry, as well as trying to work together to end the ongoing crisis throughout the game. Their relationship is put to the ultimate trial when Mary Jane gets infected by the symbiote. While the events building up to this are questionable, the revelations made throughout offer a solid test of strength to the character of both Peter and MJ, as he successfully cures his girlfriend of the symbiote's halt to her mind, further solidifying their care for one another to always push through any struggle they endure together. Really just wish they didn't get that downgrade in appearance, but I gotta bring it up, I guess. Spider-Man 2's story is filled with many issues, however, I'll actually give props to the overall arc of the story of Peter's relationship with Mary Jane. When you recognize what the story is effectively drawing out, this is a solid enough love story about a guy and a girl who were together, struggled, broke apart, reunited, struggled again, and stayed united. The only thing the woke allegations have on this shit is Mary Jane's appearance, which, while odd, especially given her appearance in the previous game, which can apply to the other characters as well, I think anybody playing or even talking about this game can go through it without constantly fixating on that one aspect alone, unless you're really petty, but we won't talk about that. I've said it before, I guess I gotta say it again, with how Spider-Man 2 ended, directly pointing to having Miles take the steering wheel and Peter handles things from the back seat as we introduce a potential third Spider-Person, people have been a bit up in arms about the portrayal of Miles versus Peter. Insomniac was no exception to this, as they directly have Peter and Miles fight, with Miles being the direct victor. I can understand the specific scenario, as I would argue that a symbiote-infected Peter having no reason to hold back should probably be able to take this one. However, I think we're a little aware that Miles is low-key stronger than Peter. And let's be real, this man literally just has to touch you and then it's over, so like... People tend to complain that it's too early in Spider-Man's career for him to retire, which one is jumping the gun and two isn't true. Peter isn't retiring or bailing on being Spider-Man, at least not as far as we know. He's simply letting Miles have more control over the city when it comes to protecting and patrolling it. He's now the main Spider-Man of the Insomniac universe. How this harms the storytelling objectively? It doesn't. The legacy of Peter Parker in this universe is still relatively treated as that, a legacy. Yes, it could be handled much better and should be handled much better, but this really does no harm, as Spider-Man isn't the only character to have a successor. Scarlet Spider, Mayday, Cindy Moon, his other clone, even the Prowler at one point wore the mask to throw off suspicion that Peter was Spider-Man. This is nothing new. My point is, Spider-Man isn't a stranger to having a successor. Regardless of him taking the back seat in an arguably young age, not only does this truly perform no harm to the story overall, or his character, as he's literally not quitting. So what's the issue here? Not like Miles sucks, his character is great. I mean, I guess Peter was kinda written to be so is that it? People feel that Peter is being butchered in service of Miles? I mean, I suppose I can kinda see it, as Miles has more of a satisfying and fulfilling arc compared to Peter. Peter's arc is more so leaning into him feeling powerless and supposed to undergo the relatable issue of addiction, but it's really not handled nearly as well as it should be in this game. Peter only holds the symbiote suit for about 3 days within the game, undergoing a fast and more aggressive transformation of just how bad the suit is impacting him and his behavior. It can be argued in this instance that it's really not a well enough development overall to rush such an arc in this fashion. The Spider-Man 3 movie suffers from the same same problem on top of hardly getting the symbiote right, but in Fearless, nobody ever really did. Fun fact, in the comics, the symbiote actually never made Peter more aggressive. Instead, it just, freaked Peter out that it was alive and draining his energy. Anyway, Miles' arc is arguably more fulfilling as it has a true sense of closure with Martin Lee, his grievance tied to the past of his father's death, and moving on from it in order to secure a better future. Even if it means working with a struggling Lee who is far from redemption, but it's not completely off the table for him. Peter's arc is understandable on paper, but in practice, questionable. It's understandable that he feels the need to keep the symbiote, however, via the prior incidents of him being an arguably over-reliant hero on Miles or other factors, doesn't really help the case of a nearly decade-long experienced Spider-Man. I would rather his struggles be more internal or complex, instead of him just struggling more with what he's been doing for such a long time. Maybe focus a bit more on the struggle to maintain a personal life as well as a superhero life, and the symbiote kinda helps him balance that out and get things done more quickly and efficiently, instead of being a tool that he arguably couldn't hold his own without. The cost being what it already was in the base game, becoming more aggressive and isolating towards others, but lean even more into that. Make him even madder, and over the course of more time. Or hell, that circus scene with the lady? Yeah, let that lady just straight up die and have Harry reveal himself another way. Because at that point, it's gonna hit much harder when he says,
I can't let this go. I'm finally everything everyone needs me to be.
and then you have a much more improved version of this character arc, at least one of many ways you can improve it. Overall, while Miles' plotline has a bit more fulfillment in comparison to Peter's, the conclusion reached that Peter would like to take the time dedicated towards fixing his broken personal life is one that we shouldn't be judging so harshly on. Keep in mind, Peter's nearly at his 30s right now, and he just re-entered a brutal dash of unemployment whilst trying to patch up a house and broken home and recover a nearly broken relationship. Said relationship nearly broke twice, by the way. Meanwhile, Miles is still a young scholar with a girlfriend and a best friend and mom who are already aware of his superhero identity, along with his neighborhood, which is showcased to give Miles more benefits than not. Miles has what Peter right now doesn't and needs compensation for: people. By the way, Peter's aunt, mother figure, is dead. Two most stand-up people he's ever known now locked up. His best friend, who he just got packed with, is now gone again. His ally, who recently walked down a bad path, is still left at a sense of lost closure. Sable isn't around and is easily angered. And oh yeah, his uncle too. All things Miles still has. He only lost his father and other best friend. Miles is still undergoing less loss than Peter, and still has much more going for him in comparison, not just having a better written arc. The reason I lay all this out is to outline that while Miles does have a superior arc written within his character that feels lacking in Peter, from a narrative standpoint, it's understandable what's being taken into account. I don't think it's really woke or overly political to have a story with a legend status character, and said legend status character undergoing an arc of passing the mantle. This one admittedly could have been handled better, but really wasn't handled horribly, at least not all around. Okay, so now that I think I rolled through all the allegations of the causes of this game being called woke, now what? Why did I do this, right? What's this video for besides hopes for clicks? Well, as this script is being jotted down and read aloud in a basement by myself, the Game Awards has recently included announcements for The Witcher 4 and Naughty Dog's newest project, both having an obvious female lead of a main character, and as you could guess, people are losing their minds. Over what? I still don't know. Because mind you, one is an announcement trailer, so we don't even see gameplay like that, and the other is a follow-up on an elongated established series. So what's the problem? Well, we need some sort of reason, and the faces of these ladies look a little too normal and real, so we gotta call it woke. Dude, I've talked about this issue in the past so many times. We are officially at a point where media discussion is approached to for nothing but points and not genuine criticism or what it takes to make a piece of media better. And honestly, I'm really fucking tired. I haven't even been doing this that long, but God damn it. No one cares if a game is good or not. No one cares if a story is good or not. So many of the people who cover the games they talk about suck at said game, so it's hard to take what they say so seriously when they don't even understand the product they review. I'll go off unhinged or on tangents about things I don't understand in media and act as if I do. Take that with a grain of salt, because you'll never catch me here unironically making reviews on things I don't understand. And if I ever do, then eggs in my face. And while there were points in the beginning of things like comic books going too far into unnecessary politics and that wanting to be avoided due to the divisive nature, now it's the consumers going way too far to finger point at just about everything for doing the same thing when it's blatantly not. Or people will take small notes of examples, blow them out of proportion, and make them seem like there's a problem for including legitimately harmless real-world elements, which they've been doing, but now all of a sudden it's a problem. Now if you have a black character taking center stage, it's a problem. Now if you have a female character who looks like a woman you'd see in real life, it's a problem. Now if a female character has breasts or an ass that isn't scoping 20 feet wide and is covered, it's a problem. Now if your male character isn't taking center stage, it's a problem. Now if your game isn't ultra masculine, it's a problem. Now if your game is trying to reach a broader spectrum and not just appeal to one group, it's a problem. I can't fucking stand it anymore. And as a content creator who enjoys having these discussions on games or stories, witnessing the discussions being approached to in such a disgusting and uncaring way, I can't help but wonder, why bother? Why bother when the vast majority are either unwilling or straight up unable to engage with the discussion fairly or honestly and put aside any minuscule points without blowing them out of proportion? Not like people will listen regardless. They'll just stay in the echo chamber of ignorance and insecurity, not willing to give things a try or truly understand a differing perspective. The people who scream woke every other second tend to not even be good at the games they hurl this about anyway. But then I remember playing and experiencing things for myself, regardless of what everyone says about them, and coming to my own conclusions out of at least an attempt of honesty and unbiased favor. And the satisfaction I get from staying true to myself and at least being semi-reasonable in the best way I can when coming here to talk about it, at least to whoever hears what I have to say. And it's better when recognizing others who can come to the same genuine reasoning and at least understanding if the disagreement remains. The problem with so many people going too far into the anti-SJW, anti-woke spectrum is very undeniable at this point. As I've said before, Spider-Man 2 is a victim of some people caring too much for the real-world references in a game set to take place in the real world, only to receive harsh labels anyway. And not even for problems that are true at the core, like the mediocrity or the lack of proper gameplay elements that make it stand out. As I've said, Spider-Man 2 isn't a bad game at all, but it could have and should have been much better. However, I refuse to act as if the blame lies on the political commentary on this game's shortcomings, especially when 1, the game's always had good reception regardless, and 2, that blame specifically is so minuscule and insignificant, as the whole purpose of this video is to point out. Instead of criticizing stupid shit like if a face model is attractive in a game, or if a guy's character is super stoic and edgy and perfect, or what the black character is doing, how about we criticize with points of substance that actually make a game good or bad, and not minute, petty, dumb things that don't enhance the game's true quality. If not, it's not like it'll matter anyway, as games will still be continued to be pumped out, with good ones that are either sequels to established series, or finally gaining more unique ones with more originality, or just mediocre ones that will be claimed to be messes even though they were only a few steps away from being better, or just simply bad games. But not bad games because of the things weirdos want to point out. Actual bad games that were either poorly developed, poorly made, or just simply poor all around. Learn the difference, at least between that and actually shoehorning things that drag a product down.
Unquote. While right-leaning people tend toward the second definition,
anything left of center.
Quote, politically liberal or progressive, as in matters of racial and social justice, especially in a way that is considered unreasonable or extreme.
That's the problem, though, right? Because conservatives define unreasonable as anything that exists in your face, at least. And you want to know what? I'm not saying all conservatives. We're talking about like a lot of this in like an online sense, but a lot of these like anti-woke YouTubers, it's anything left of center. You know, it's literally anything left of center. If there's a gay guy in a video game, that is woke. I mean, you got Synthetic Man having like meltdowns calling it woke because not all the characters in Warhammer are white. You know, it's silly goosery.